Good day, everyone. First of all, I would like very much to acknowledge and to thank Antonino for inviting me to speak at this meeting of the CDKL5 Alliance. I'm extremely honored to be here in that capacity. So I'm going to tell you about the International CDKL5 Disorder Database, known as ICDD, stepping from the past into the future. And so, how did it all begin? It began nearly 25 years ago when I encountered this family where there were twin girls. The one on the right had been diagnosed as atypical Rett syndrome, the early onset seizure variant of Rett syndrome. And the one on the left had been diagnosed as autism. They also had a brother who sadly had died of a severe neurological disorder some years previously. So I came across this family because I have an Australian Rett syndrome database. And the girl on the right was participating in that. But when in 1999, the cause of Rett syndrome was identified as a mutation in the MECP2 gene, it turned out that none of the affected members of this family had a mutation in the MECP2 gene. So clearly, the cause was not Rett syndrome. It was a defect in another gene. So it was really some 5 years later when John Christodoulou from Sydney, New South Wales, Joseph Gex from Adelaide, South Australia, and myself combined together, and the geneticist, the lab geneticist identified the mutation in the CDKL5 gene, and I provided much of the clinical material, and together we were able to publish this paper showing that mutations in CDKL5 do cause a severe neurodevelopmental disorder. So at the same time, we had been collecting data on Rett syndrome through our International Rett Syndrome Database, InterRett. And in that database, we did have individuals who had the early onset seizure variant of Rett syndrome, who had been tested and who had a mutation in the CDKL5 gene. So we thought it would be a very good idea to compare the characteristics of the 86 individuals with a mutation in CDKL5 with the 920 individuals with a mutation in the MECP2 gene. And so what did we find? We found that in CDD, it was extremely likely that there would have been seizures within the first year of life, 90% within the first 3 months. There'd be severe global developmental delay and severely impaired gross motor function. We also found that it was very likely that they would have sleep disturbances and that there would be abnormal muscle tone, often floppy or extreme flexibility, known medically as hypertonia. They might also quite likely have teeth grinding or bruxism and gastrointestinal issues. Possibly, they might have unusual facial features or unusual hands and feet. And you can see the pictures here on the left-hand side. They might have autonomic disturbances, manifest as cold hands or feet or breathing disturbances. But it would be unlikely that they would, as in Rett syndrome, that they would be walking independently and that they would have had the head growth deceleration that occurs in Rett syndrome. Although they had unusual facial features, other birth defects would be rare. So why did we need an international CDKL5 database? We now knew that CDD was an independent disorder. Yet in 2011, there was so much more we needed to know about many aspects of CDD, including the diagnosis, when were children being diagnosed, and if they were diagnosed, what information was provided to them by the doctors, was it helpful and was it accurate? We didn't know much about the natural history. These children had not been followed over time, and that was essential to follow them over time so we knew what the changes happen in this disorder. The clinical features, we knew about the seizures, the severe developmental delay, but we didn't know about everything. But we needed a comprehensive assessment of the clinical features. And we didn't know why there was clinical variation. Why was it that some children could actually walk and a few could talk, while the majority could not? What was underlying that? We wanted to make sure that they were getting the appropriate interventions and being treated properly. And we knew that there was a possibility of cell-based treatments in the future, genetic treatments. And it was really important to be clinical trial ready. And so in 2012, collaborating with ourselves and the International Foundation for CDKL5 Research, we established the database. And we started recruiting in September 2012, just over, well, nearly 9 years ago now. The database aims to collect information from families across the world about their child who has CDD, about their developmental history, their functional abilities, their seizures, other medical problems in their management, and the impact of having a child with CDD on the family. So we designed a very comprehensive questionnaire, which is generally completed online, but can be completed on paper or by telephone interview. It's already translated into multiple languages, and further translations are in progress. So what were the topics covered in the questionnaire? The early period, we ask about early development, we ask about the circumstances of the diagnosis. We also ask about how families appreciated the diagnosis or whether there were problems. We ask about regression and function. We ask about gross motor function, hand function, communication. And we ask about the epilepsy, multiple questions about how it was in the beginning, how it is at questionnaire completion, what medication where they were on the beginning and later on, whether they've had a honeymoon period without seizures. We also ask about other medical problems, gastrointestinal, respiratory, bone, spine, musculoskeletal, and about sleep, behavior, and mood. We don't know anything about the mental health problems in CDD. We ask about hand stereotypies, unusual hand movements, which occur in Rett syndrome, and how much do they occur in CDD. We ask about height, weight, and puberty, about medications, and about therapies at different time periods. We ask about the family as well, because that is important, that we know about the impact on the family. So we ask about parental health, family quality of life, and respite and assistance. So where are we today, over 8 years on from starting? This just shows you the registrations over time. Now, we actually started in 2007 because we did register some families through the Inter-Rett database. As you know, there were about 86 families in our first study. So they had registered prior to us developing the specific CDKL5 questionnaire. But after that, the registrations increased and the bubbles got bigger right up until, and we're now actually in 2021. So here you can see on the right, which provides similar information to the graph I've just shown you, but this is a pie graph showing you the proportion of cases that are coming from different countries. You can see that 42%, nearly half were from the US, but there's also another big group of countries which have contributed substantial data. And they include the UK, France, Australia, Germany, Canada, Brazil, Russia, Japan, and the Netherlands. And we have, we've had advocates and specific people who have helped us collect that data from different countries. The graph on the left shows the age group at registration. This is actually changing over time because nowadays a very high proportion of children who are registered either are under a year old or between 1 and 2 years. But overall, this accounts for just under half, with another 22% 3 to 5 years. But originally, and in just over a quarter in total, many of the children were between 6 to 18 years when they were first registered, because at that time, the CDKL5 testing was not available for them in their infancy. So this is the distribution, total distribution today, but it will change over time. Now, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about the CDKL5 gene, because that is important. I say here that there are 330 distinct pathogenic mutations in the data we have collected. So, and we're all wanting to look at genotype-phenotype relationships, but it's difficult when you have so many different mutations. So what researchers have done, they've divided the gene into areas of the gene and to investigate whether there are any relationships between mutations in these specific areas. So this first group one, we call it the no functional protein. This is truncations before AA1781 and whole gene deletions. Group 2 are missense in-frame mutations within the catalytic domain here. Group 3 are truncations after AA71, but before AA781. And group 4 are truncations after AA781. And you can see the distributions of the different groups here. But what I wanted to focus on also is that we have 401 individuals and we have 303 distinct pathogenic mutations. And of these mutations, 49, 16% are recurrent. So that means that 1 in 6 of the mutations affects more than one child, just 1 in 6. And if you look at the individuals, of the 401 individuals, only a third, just over a third, 37% had a recurrent mutation. That's 147. So nearly 2/3 of individuals will have their own private unique mutation at the moment. And when that's the case, it's difficult to make comparisons. So the maximum number of individuals per mutation is 9, and that mutation there is the commonest one. And we only have 10 unique mutations, which include greater than 4 individuals, although we've got over 400 individuals in our database. So it's a challenge. Nevertheless, working together with families, we have made considerable achievements. As I described earlier, we have shown that CDD is an independent disorder. It's not actually a variant of Rett syndrome, although it does share some features with Rett syndrome, and that still requires further investigation. We've looked at developmental milestones, so we can say what percentage of children or girls or boys are likely to sit by certain ages, what percentage are likely to walk by certain ages. We can do this by gender. We can also do it by mutation group. Similarly, with functioning, we can compare the children who can sit and can't sit and see if there are differences in age, differences in mutation group, differences in sex. Also, we can compare those who walk and don't walk. We could also look at communication, hand function in the same way. Seizures, we have quite comprehensive data on seizures, and we have been able to publish this. We've looked at seizures at onset and seizures at the time of questionnaire completion. We have we've asked about medication, so we've got the history of medication used for seizures for these children. We also ask about periods of seizure freedom or honeymoon period. So all this data has been analyzed and presented in this paper. So we also ask about other medical problems. So this is important information. We've investigated respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems, sleep problems, musculoskeletal problems. And in many cases, we've been able to do a comparison with Rett syndrome. With regards to epilepsy, as well as medication, many children are on the ketogenic diet, and a lesser number have had vagal nerve stimulation inserted. So we have collected data on parental perspectives on the ketogenic diet and found quite a number of positive perceptions, comments. So that's published in that paper. And the ketogenic diet is now being recommended in certain circumstances. And I think there will be more literature building on what we have done. Vagal nerve stimulation can be quite positive, although doesn't eliminate the seizures, but it does seem to improve them in some cases. And families have provided their perspectives on that. Child quality of life. This was our first paper on quality of life in CDD. And in fact, what we did was we interviewed a small number of families to find out what their perspectives were on their child's quality of life. And this helped us understand whether it would be appropriate to use the QI disability, which is a measure of quality of life developed by Jenny Downs, whether this would be suitable for examining quality of life in CDD. And we found that it was. We've also looked at parental well-being. We wondered what aspects of CDD might be particularly troublesome for parents or might be good for parents, like gastrostomy. Does that relieve stress for parents? So what we have found, we've looked at factors which improve well-being and factors which are actually threatening quality of life in CDD for the mother, for the parents. So this was an interesting question. Does CDD go beyond epilepsy? This was a young woman in her late 20s who had a mild intellectual disability and some unusual behaviors, but no epilepsy. And she had never had a diagnosis until quite recently, when it was found that she had a mutation in the CDKL5 gene. Now, her mutation impairs CDKL5 function, but to a lesser degree than the typical mutations. So this perhaps suggests that maybe CDD does go beyond epilepsy, and there are other children, people out there with mutations who present with other symptomatology. If you think back to my first slide, I showed the girl with autism. She doesn't have seizures, but she has a mutation in the CDKL5 gene. So more recently, we have used our measure of quality of life called QI disability to measure quality of life in CDD, and we've looked at the determinants of this. We've also compared parental well-being in CDD with other disorders. Now, this data on both child quality of life and parental quality of life is very important for drug companies when they're making decisions about which disorder to develop treatments for, because disorders which have a high burden obviously are going to be go up the rank in priority. So this information is very important for pharmaceutical companies. So what do we know about individual CDKL5 variants or mutations? I mentioned how many different mutations there were, but we have been able to look at the small number of mutations which do affect multiple individuals. And we have been able to find differences in the developmental level and differences in the severity between these mutations. So this is an important start to the investigation of genotype-phenotype relationships. But we need much more data. We need bigger numbers so we can carry on with this research. Now you can go to our database at that URL there, and you can search it for common characteristics of CDD, and you can look at the results by gender or by these large mutation groups. And for example, this is looking at sleep problems according to the large mutation groups. And down here we have ability to walk according to these large mutation groups as well. So what are we investigating today and into the future? We're quality of life for children with CDD is a major theme. We're also interested in the family's experience of the diagnosis of CDD in their children. And we're doing this work along with Scott Demarest at the Children's Hospital in Colorado. We're looking at changes in development and clinical severity over time using our unique longitudinal data. This is very important work. And we're finding out what contributes to the variability and functional ability in children with CDD. We're trying to find out whether there are any modifiable factors which affect the attainment of milestones. And we are using our data to prepare for clinical trials in combination with the International CDKL5 Clinical Research Network. So just a little bit more about our quality of life research program. We have described quality of life and the individual domains of quality of life in children and adults with CDD. And we're investigating factors affecting the quality of life. This has used the instrument that Jenny Downs developed called QI Disability. We're also comparing quality of life in CDD with other neurodevelopmental disorders. And we're considering what factors can be modified to improve quality of life in CDD. And finally, we're undertaking the preparatory work needed to use quality of life as an outcome measure in clinical trials. So in summary, the International CDKL5 Disorder Database is an ongoing research database which collects and uses data provided by caregivers to inform multiple publications in the scientific and medical literature. In this way, to spread knowledge and understanding of CDD to the medical and general communities. And it's also being used to develop outcome measures for future clinical trials. So long as families have already registered with ICDD, they'll also be able to provide consent for any data they submit to the new CDKL5 registry to be accessed by the ICDD. This will be very valuable. But it is important to be aware that the data can only be linked if families register and consent to both databases. If you require any information about this, please contact me. In the meantime, this is where you register with the ICDD. Very important. So you can either go through the International Foundation for CDKL5 Research founded for IRCF, or you can go directly to our register here. And this is the registration form where you can register. When you register, I will then follow up with a phone call and tell you a bit more about the database and what you can do to participate. And thank you very much for to the many families who have submitted data to our studies. We're really most appreciative, and it's extremely valuable. And we also appreciate our funders and the support we've received from all these agencies. Thank you very much indeed.